So tonight we're looking at the first noble truth. For each of the noble truths there is a concept or an action really associated with the truth. So when I said yesterday that the truths are all about knowing, it's a bit more complicated. Each of the four noble truths has something to be done. It's called a kicca. Kicca means something to be done. And the Buddha said that complete accomplishment in the Four Noble Truths involves an understanding of the truth, an understanding of what needs to be done in regards to the truth, and knowledge that one has accomplished the task. So these three things are called satya, which means the truth itself, kicca, which means that which needs to be done in regards to the truth, and katta. Katta means that which has been done. And so for each of the Four Noble Truths, there's these three, which 3 times 4 is 12. The Buddha called this the 12-fold accomplishment in regards to the Four Noble Truths. So the first noble truth is suffering. The first noble truth is not that life is suffering. You read in various introductory texts to Buddhism that the Buddha said life is suffering, and that the first noble truth is that life is suffering. That's not what the first noble truth is. The first noble truth is suffering. It's the truth of suffering. That there is suffering. In fact, the funny thing is, the one thing the Buddha leaves out of his description of suffering is life. So to say that life is suffering is quite a surprise, because it's the one thing the Buddha left out. It's mainly because life isn't an event. Life isn't something you can say, hey, this is happiness or this is suffering. Life is just a concept. Concepts are not suffering. Concepts don't exist. The important thing about this truth is to identify and acknowledge that there's a problem. Acknowledge that there's something that needs to be addressed. So the Buddha outlined, he gave examples of suffering. Birth is suffering. Birth is an interesting one in itself, because it doesn't have to be specifically suffering, stressful. Birth can be, well, I mean, it is in many cases stressful, but not in terms of the birth itself, just in terms of the mechanical process. It can be quite painful, obviously, quite stressful. But I don't think that's what the Buddha is getting at here. Or at least we can look at it on two levels. Birth is suffering because for the mother it can be quite stressful, even to the point of causing injury or death. And it can be painful and stressful for the baby coming out. So the birthing process itself is, as a part of life, it's really not a good start. We talk about the miracle of birth and so on and so on. I mean, it's a bit of a... It would be a miracle if a stork delivered a baby. That would be a miracle. But this bloody, screaming child going through a passage that's way too small for it, It's not really anything miraculous about it. I mean, there is something, I suppose, that seems miraculous, but as far as miracles go, it's not the most awe-inspiring, I think. Not for me anyway. I've never been through it myself, not in this lifetime. But birth is, I think, in a general sense, birth is suffering because of what it entails. It entails the arising of new problems. It means failure, If you're born again, well, we think birth, hey, that's a great thing. We celebrate it. We celebrate it every year. It's kind of funny, I mean, Buddhists don't really celebrate birthdays, probably for this reason, because the first thing we're taught is that birth is suffering, so what are you going to celebrate? You're celebrating failure, really. Right? We celebrate it thinking, yes, birth is good, so good that I'm a human being, so good that I was born. This life, the wonder, the potential. It's such a short-sighted view. Because, okay, I mean, yes, it's a novelty, but we live in kind of the opposite of Groundhog Day, that movie. Instead of repeating the same thing over and over again and remembering it, we repeat it over and over and think it's new. I don't know if there's ever been a movie or a science fiction book about that, but we keep forgetting and doing the same thing over and over again. As though we're robots having our memories erased and doing it again and again and again. If you're born a human, the kindest thing we could say is it means you're born here because you still have lessons to learn. Which really means you just failed, You took the exam at the end of life and you failed it, so you got to come back and redo the course. You didn't graduate to heaven or the Brahma world. Certainly didn't graduate to Nibbana. So birth is failure. It's the cause of great suffering. You're born again means you have to go through it all over again, all the stress and suffering of life. Old age, sickness, death, these are suffering. Don't think we need to explain that very much. So old age, sickness, death, these are the things we fear in life. Clearly, these are the suffering aspects. This is what the Buddha focused on because it's a clear example. There's very little argument, I think, that old age can be quite stressful, even fearsome. Just the thought of losing our faculties. Alzheimer's is terrifying. Having a stroke and being paralyzed. Sickness, death. Death is so fearsome. And then we have the minor sufferings that are constant throughout life, is sorrow, lamentation, pain, sorrow, lamentation, despair. Dukkha domana supaya. Soka parideva, dukkha domana supayasa. All these various, and you include in there, of course, all sorts of mental disturbance, mental illness, we might say. Mental upset, getting upset. Apiyehi sampiyogo dukkho. Being associated with what is not dear, which is not pleasing to us. Piyehi vipayogo dukkho. Being dissociated or losing what is dear to you. Yampichang nalabati tampi dukkhaṃ. Yampi chang nalabati tampi dukkhaṃ. It's very poetic to listen to. This passage on suffering is quite pleasing to the ear. There's a song that's it's quite pleasant. There's a song where the Four Noble Truths are actually sung, but it's kind of funny that it should be so pleasing when the subject is just the worst. Apiyehi sampayogo dukkho piyehi vipayogo dukkho yampi chang nalabati tampi dukkhaṃ. We chant this every day in Buddhist monasteries. So not getting what you want, getting what you don't want. Being associated with what is undear, being dissociated from what is dear. And whatever you want, not getting that is suffering. So these are all the examples of what is suffering. And it's a very coarse understanding of suffering. It's really not the noble truth of suffering in an ultimate sense, in the sense of what you realize through the practice. None of this is what you realize through the practice. What you realize is much more refined than that. It's what gives all of that meaning, and it's what gives all of that reality or existence. The five aggregates are dukkha. Sankitena panchupadana kanda dukkha. In brief, the five aggregates are suffering, which really is everything. Everything that arises, right? The Buddha said, Sabbe sankhara dukkha. All sankharas, all formations, every aspect of experience is dukkha. And so that's getting close to saying that, well, life is suffering, right? Except that it's not. And so here, this is where we have to understand the truths in a different way, and we have to understand the word suffering in a different way. Because it's a funny thing to call something suffering, right? Is that table suffering? Is a sound that I hear suffering? It's kind of weird, you know. Sound is clearly not suffering. So we have to take dukkha actually as an adjective. It's actually not a noun. We're not talking about suffering. We're talking about something being stressful, for lack of a better word. We really don't have a perfect word with all the right connotations in English. Dukkha, someone told me it means, du is of course bad, just means bad, but kha is like the rotating of an axle. If the axle is well greased, it's sukha, it goes well. If it's poorly greased, it's rough, you know. So frictive might be, frictive, is that right? Is that a word? Friction, it has to do with friction. It's not smooth, not efficient, not harmonious and peaceful. And so that gets to the point. When we talk about the five aggregates, what we're saying is that they are stressful, or they are a cause for stress. And the Buddha uses the word upadana kanda. He makes clear that why they're a cause for stress is because we cling to them. It's the clinging to the five aggregates that is stressful. So when we talk about these things as being dukkha, experiences, and really every sankhara, every formation as being dukkha, what we mean is, if you cling to it, it causes you suffering. What we mean is that it is something that, it's like calling something poisonous. If you call this plant or this liquid poisonous, There's nothing poisonous about it. It's just a liquid. It just sits there. It doesn't poison anybody. It doesn't do anything. But when drunk, when ingested, it has the quality. It has that impact on a being to kill the body of poison. In the same way, sankharas have their nature, or their impact, their effect, really, their effect on us is to cause stress when clung to. So what it's saying really is that they're not worth clinging to. They're not sukha. They're not something that you can acquire and find happiness through. That's really the truth of suffering. So how it plays out, of course, is that in our meditation we start to see that the things that we thought were making us happy were a source of happiness. Hey, that came again, that makes me happy, are not. So this is where the understanding comes in. So the gicca, that which is to be done in regards to suffering, is to see it completely. It's pariññana, I guess would be the word. Pariñña is the word. Pari means like parinibbana. Pari means around, fully, completely. Pariñña means to know. Ña is the root to know. Pariñña means to know something completely. Pariññeya means it should be known completely. Should be fully known. The task in regards to suffering that the Buddha gave is not to escape. And this is important. I've said this many times. It's very important for meditators. Be clear, you're not coming here to escape suffering. You're coming here because you want to escape suffering, but in fact that is part of the problem. Our desire to escape suffering is causing us suffering, because we're associated with that which we don't like. When, on the other hand, you fully understand suffering, and you understand the things that are suffering, that are dukkha, they can't cause you suffering because you don't cling to them. Right? When we talk about the three characteristics, this is what we mean. Seeing that these things that you thought were stable, satisfying, controllable, are unstable, unsatisfying, uncontrollable, not worth clinging to. Not me, not mine, not myself. And once you've seen that, once you've fully understood that, really that you've done everything. The Four Noble Truths are linked in this way. You don't realize one by one by one. They come in a package. In the Visuddhimagga it explains it like when a candle, burns, when the flame burns the candle, the wax is melted, the wick is burnt up, and the darkness is dispelled, and the light is produced. Four things happen all at once. It's just a simple simile to explain that. The Four Noble Truths happen all, not at the same moment exactly, but it's at the same time, in the same sequence, in a single sequence. So once you understand suffering, the rest of the Four Noble Truths fall into place. But that's the task to be done, not to escape suffering, but to understand it completely. To understand these things as suffering in an abstract sense, but more importantly to observe them and to see these things that I thought were source of happiness, I understand now are not going to bring me happiness. And when you let go of them, of course, the rest of the Four Noble Truths come into play. So there you go. That's the first Noble Truth in brief.